Goblin launch detected.
Hey gang! Using the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, will get you 10% off any order over $10 at Flipside Gaming. It'll also get you 10% off any orders of singles at Multizone. And it'll get you 10% off most products at Original Magic Art, with the exceptions of some paintings. If these fine sites don't have what you're looking for, you can also consider using my affiliate link when ordering from TCG Player. And if you'd like to join the generic Goblin Gang to support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description below. Hey gang, looking to get your hands on a free box of Theros Beyond Death? Well, look no further. Flipside Gaming will be giving one away between December 12th and January 27th. You can enter by using my promo code MTGMudsta on an order of $10 or more, or by sending a self-addressed, stamped envelope or postcard to them. It's one entry per person, and for more information, follow the link below. Alrighty, so in another attempt to push my sanity to the very limit, I've got a great installment of EDH for you. Today's game has some new friends and a new commander, with Miguel having sleeved up a Chulane deck. He keeps Timur Sabertooth, Soul Ring, Stone Cloaker, Neoform, a Forest, a Plains, and Paradise Druid. New to the channel is Fred playing First Sliver, keeping a Gale Rider Sliver, Synapse Sliver, Harmonic Sliver, Brood Sliver, Might Sliver, Unclaimed Territory, and a Brushland. On avait Matthias avec Pramikon, keeping Gisela, Combustible Gearhulk, Bloodthirsty Blade, Izzet Signet, a Plains, an Island, and Hall of Heliod's Generosity. And last but certainly not least is Milan playing Kefnet, keeping 2 islands, Blatant Thievery, Mystic Confluence, Time Warp, Lightning Greaves, and Opt. Matthias wins the die roll and starts us off. Matthias plays a Plains and passes. Milan plays an island. Miguel plays a Forest and casts Soul Ring. Fred plays an Unclaimed Territory, naming Slivers, and casts Gale Rider Sliver. Matthias plays a Clifftop Retreat and drops an Izzet Signet. At the end of turn, Milan plays Opt. He scries one, leaving it on top and drawing it. Milan plays a tapped Lonely Sandbar and casts a Mystic Remora. Miguel plays a Plains and casts his Paradise Druid. Fred plays a Brushland and decides to hit Milan for 1. Matthias plays an island and pays for his commander. He chooses everyone to attack to their right, demonstrating for the table. Milan pays for his Remora and plays an island before casting Lightning Greaves. Miguel plays another Forest and taps out for Chulane, passing turn. Fred can't find that third land he needs, and he hits Miguel for 1 and passes. Matthias plays a Hall of Heliod's Generosity, paying 2 for Bloodthirsty Blade. He can't pay the Remora attacks, and Milan draws 1. He then attaches the blade to Chulane, which Miguel isn't super upset about. Milan lets the Remora go and plays an island. This is enough now for Kefnet, who comes in and gets to break in some new Greaves. Miguel draws and heads to combat. He's forced to swing Chulane, has to swing at Milan. Milan blocks with Kefnet, but before the damage is dealt, Miguel flashes in a Stonecloaker. He draws from Chulane's on-cast trigger, but has no extra land to play. He then has the creature come in and bounce Chulane back to his hand as the Cloaker resolves. In his post-combat main phase, Miguel then uses Neoform and sacrifices the Stonecloaker to go and find a creature card that costs 4. He finds a Beast Whisperer, who also comes in with a +1/+1 counter. Fred draws and still can't find a land. He hits Miguel for 1 to help make himself feel better, and has to discard a Sliver at the end of turn. Matthias plays a Battlefield Forge and pays 6 mana for Combustible Gearhulk. He asks Fred if he can draw the 3, but Fred says no. We then see the top 3 cards being revealed with 2 lands and Cyclonic Rift, and the Gearhulk deals 2 to Fred. Milan looks at his top card, but doesn't reveal it to the Kefnet's trigger. He plays an island and pays 5 for Bribery. He listens to the table as everyone tries to convince him that the other players at the table have better creatures. Milan ultimately decides to look through Miguel's library, and goes through it, putting out Tetiova. He then passes turn. Miguel casts a Reflector Mage in his main phase, drawing from the Beast Whisperer. As it comes in, he gets to bounce Tatiova back to his hand, and he passes turn. Fred draws, and I don't really know what to say. He doesn't have a land, and has to discard Door to Nothingness after hitting Miguel for 1. Mateus plays a mountain, and things take a turn as he resolves Gisela. Moving to combat, he hits Fred for 12 with his Gear Hulk, and passes. Milan looks at his top card, but puts it to hand. He casts a Thought Vessel in his main phase before passing turn. Miguel recasts Chulane in his main phase, drawing from the Whisperer trigger. Milan responds once the draw is finished, and casts Mystic Confluence before the spell is resolved. He forces Miguel to pay 3 more mana or counter the spell, which he doesn't have, and he decides to bounce the Whisperer and Gisela back to their respective owners' hands. Miguel then plays a Plains in his post-combat main phase, and then an Elvish Mystic and a Loyal Sentry before passing to Fred. Fred finally finds his 3rd land, a Battlefield Forge, and then loses 1 life from the Pain Land to help cast his Harmonic Sliver. It comes in and blows up Milan's Greaves. Mateus plays a Plains and attaches a Bloodthirsty Blade onto the Reflector Mage. He then recasts Gisela and passes. Milan taps out in his main phase, casting a Blatant Thievery. He targets Gisela from Mateus, the Unclaimed Territory from Fred, and a Paradise Druid from Miguel. He steals them all, and moving to combat, now that he controls Gisela, Milan hits Mateus for 8 damage with Kefnet. Miguel plays his first island of the game, and taps 8 mana for a Finale of Devastation. He finds a Spark Double, having it come in as a copy of the Reflector Mage, and as the bounce trigger, return Gisela to Mateus' hand. Moving to combat, Miguel has to attack with his original Reflector Mage, and he gives Milan a good smack. Fred draws and plays a Striking Sliver, losing 1 life to cast it from the Pain Land. It comes in, and with the Harmonic Sliver being on the field, he gets to blow up an artifact or an enchantment. He hits the Combustible Gear Hulk, and then hits Miguel with his 2 other slivers, and passes turn. Mateus casts a Mulldrifter, drawing 2, and then plays an island he presumably just drew. 2 mana then gets him a Talisman of Creativity, and then another 2 gets tapped, casting a Boros Signet. Milan plays a Maze of Ith, and then a Scroll Rack, which is probably a kill on sight card for a Kefnet deck. He then pays 4 mana for Drawn from Dreams, and gets a Sorcery Speed Dig Through Time. Looking at his top 7, he keeps 2 of them, and passes turn. Miguel recasts his Beast Whisperer in his main phase, and then plays a Kiyora's Follower, drawing from the Whisperer's on-cast trigger. Heading to combat, he swings the mandatory Reflector Mage at Milan, but also sends a friendly copy of it as well. Milan blocks the bladed original Reflector Mage with Kefnet, and takes the hit from the clone for 3. Fred draws, and is really struggling, having just lost a land the other turn, and with nothing else he passes. Mateus plays an Arcanomancer, bringing back his Cyclonic Rift to hand as it enters. He casts it like a normal spell, and bounces Kefnet back to Milan's hand. He then plays a Mistmeadow Witch, and pays the 1 to equip his Bloodthirsty Blade onto the Spark Double Reflector Mage. At the end of turn, Milan uses his Scroll Rack, putting 2 cards aside, drawing 2, and then putting those 2 set aside on top. Milan draws and plays a tapped Halimar Depths, rearranging his top 3. He pays 4 to recast Kefnet, and passes to Miguel. Miguel draws and makes 2 blue by tapping an island and untapping it with his Kiyora's Follower to help cast Flood of Tears. Milan doesn't want this to happen, and counters it with a counterspell. Miguel then hits to combat, swinging the Spark Double at Milan, who takes it out of combat with his Maze of Ith. Fred draws his 3rd, or should I say 4th land, and now is exclusively Pain lands, playing an Underground River. He casts a Frenetic Sliver, and while it's on the stack, Milan uses his Scroll Rack again, before presumably losing it once the sliver enters. He actually finds an answer in his newly drawn cards, and he casts Pongify to destroy the Harmonic Sliver before the Frenetic Sliver enters. With nothing else, Fred passes. Mateus activates his Mistmeadow Witch in his main phase, exiling the Mulldrifter until end of turn. He then does it again to his Arcanomancer, and moves to his end step. They return, and he returns his Rift to his hand, and draws 2 as the Mulldrifter comes in. Milan activates his Scroll Rack on his upkeep, and with the ability on the stack, Mateus uses his Rift to bounce Kefnet back to hand. Milan's turn is quite quick as he draws for turn, replays Kefnet, and passes. Miguel plays a Forest and pays 4 mana for a Timorous Sabertooth. He draws from the Beast Whisperer trigger, and then heads to combat. The Spark Double has to go at Milan again, who untaps it with his Maze of Ith again, and Miguel then passes. Fred continues the trend of his Pain lands, finding a Llanowar Wastes. He loses 1 life from a Battlefield Forge to help cast an Essence Sliver. Moving to combat, he swings some Flying, First Strike, and lifelinking slivers at Miguel for 4. With them connecting, Fred gains 4 life. Mateus draws and plays a Sacred Foundry, losing 2 life to have it come in untapped. He then pays 4 to exile the Arcanomancer, and then does it again for the Muldrifter. He passes turn, returning the 2 creatures, and brings back his Cyclonic Rift, and draws 2 cards. On Milan's upkeep, Mateus bounces Kefnet back to Milan's hand. Milan then activates his Scroll Rack to set aside 2 and draw 2, putting the older 2 on top. He recasts Kefnet, but Miguel flashes in Mystic Snake to counter it. Milan then pays 6 mana to cast Kefnet from the command zone, being fully tapped out, and passes. Miguel plays an island and casts Meteor Golem, who comes in and blows up Scroll Rack, and Miguel then remembers to draw from his Whisperer trigger. He then swings the Snake and Spark Double at Milan, who blocks the Snake and mazes the double. Before damage is dealt though, Miguel uses his Sabertooth to bounce his Mystic Snake back to hand. Fred draws and plays Yavimaya Coast, and the pain is real. He takes 5 damage, 1 from each land, and he casts the First Sliver. This has him cascading, and he runs into a Soul Ring, which at least will help him with his mana problems. Moving to combat, the Essence Sliver gets him back 3 life after it connects with Miguel. Mateus casts a Peregrine Drake in his main phase, untapping the mana he used to cast it as it enters. He then pays 4 mana to exile it until end of turn with the Witch, and pays 4 mana more for Leyline of Anticipation. He then plays out a Shivan Reef, and passes, returning the Drake to the field and untapping 5 lands. Milan reveals his draw to the Kefnet trigger, showing the Table of Time Warp. He pays 3 for the reduced copy of the spell, and puts the original to hand. He then moves through his phases, and at the end of Milan's second main phase, Mateus exiles the Drake and Muldrifter, having them come in at the end of turn, and untaps 5 lands and draws 2. Milan moves to his extra turn, and reveals an Evacuation off of his draw to the Kefnet trigger. He pays the reduced cost for the copy, which will bounce all creatures to their owner's hands, and he puts the real copy of Evacuation to hand. Responding to the copy of the spell, Mateus pays 8 mana to exile the Muldrifter and the Drake until end of turn. Responding to Mateus' hastily put onto the stack triggers, Milan casts the original copy of Evacuation to hopefully mess up the exiles. In the end, all the creatures go back to their owner's hands, and Milan passes turn. Miguel recasts Chulane and then plays a Forest and casts Elvish Mystic. He draws from the Chulane trigger and plays out an Azorius Chancery, bouncing a land to his hand. He then casts a Loyal Sentry, drawing and playing out the Forest he bounced. Miguel then casts a Shrieking Drake, drawing a card and playing a Plains, and then returns it to hand as it enters. He then recasts the Paradise Druid, drawing again and playing a Plains. He moves to his end of turn and discards down to 7. Fred loses 1 from a Pain land for a Striking Sliver, and then another life for the Gale Rider Sliver. 1 more life then gets him a Might Sliver, and he passes turn. Mateus plays an Endless Sands as his land drop, and he puts the Bloodthirsty Blade onto Chulane. 2 mana gets him a Goblin Diplomats, and then 2 more gets him a Talisman of Convictions, and he passes turn. Milan draws and cycles a Desert of the Mindful, drawing again. Kefnet then makes his umpteenth return, and Milan then passes. Miguel casts an Elvish Visionary, drawing from Chulane's on cast trigger, and then draws it as enters. He then casts Llanowar Elves, drawing on cast, but has no land to play. Moving to combat, Miguel must swing his commander, and he sends Chulane headed at Fred. Fred declares no blockers, and Matthias decides to flash in Gisela, but Miguel doesn't want to completely take Fred out just yet, and tries to counter Gisela with a Mystic Snake. It works, and Fred only takes 4. In Miguel's post-combat main phase, he casts an Elite Guildmage, drawing on cast, and Matthias flashes in Illuminarch's Ascension. The Guild Mage then enters, and Miguel gains 3 life and draws another card. Miguel then casts a Memnite, drawing another card. He then recasts Sabretooth, drawing a card and playing out Temple of the False God to Chulane's trigger. Miguel then bounces the Memnite back to hand with the Sabretooth and recasts it, drawing a card. He then plays a Gilded Goose, drawing a card and playing a Forest and getting a food token as it enters. Miguel then discards down to 7, and Mateus gains a counter on his Ascension at the end of turn. Fred loses 2 life to recast a Frenetic Sliver, and Mateus then flashes in Swiftfoot Boots. Fred then loses another 1 for the Essence Sliver, and heading to combat, he swings a Sliver Squad at Mateus for 10, and gains 10. Mateus recasts his Peregrine Drake, and untaps the lands he used for it. He plays out a Mismeta Witch, and exiles the Drake until end of turn. He then evokes the Mulldrifter, and responding to the Sacrifice trigger, exiles it as well, and then draws 2. Moving to the end of his turn, he returns the creatures, untapping 5 lands, and drawing 2 cards. Milan draws and moves through his phases, with Mateus using the Witch to exile the Drake, which nets him 1 more untapped land at the end of turn. Miguel plays a Forest and casts Meteor Golem, drawing from the cast and playing out a Forest. He targets the Leyline of Anticipation, which has Mateus flash in Pramikon, and has the table swinging this way. Miguel then pays 2 to return the Meteor Golem to hand, and recasts it again, drawing on cast. He also gets to play it on Island, and puts the target on Pramikon. Mateus decides to pay 4 and exiles Commander until end of turn. Miguel then plays a Thorn Mammoth, drawing a card and playing out a Plains. The Thorn Mammoth then fights the Drake, and the Drake loses. Miguel then casts Shrieking Drake, drawing from the Chulane trigger, and as it enters, returns it to his hand, and then has the Thorn Mammoth again trigger, having the Thorn Mammoth fight the Mulldrifter. Miguel then plays out an Ornithopter, drawing and playing it on an island, and has the Mammoth fight the Might Sliver, and with this, the Mammoth crumbles under the damage. Moving to combat, Miguel swings 4 at Fred and 5 at Milan. He then passes, which has Pramikon return at the end of turn, and forces everyone to swing to their right. Fred draws, and loses 1 life to cast a Synapse Sliver, and with the Sliver on the stack, Mateus taps his Diplomats, forcing Fred to attack, and with Pramikon out, this means he can only attack Miguel. He doesn't really want to, but he has to swing his board at Miguel for 7 first strike damage. Milan says he'll help out, and he untaps one of them with a Maze. Miguel then blocks the Gale Rider with the Ornithopter, and the Frenetic with his Elite Guild Mage. Fred doesn't want to lose the Frenetic, and he activates the ability, using a die to represent the coin. He makes the right call, and exiles it until end of turn. Miguel then takes the Essence Sliver to the face, losing 3, and Fred gains 4 life, and draws a card. Fred then casts a Thought Vessel, and passes, returning his Frenetic Sliver to the field. Mateus evokes a Reviarch in his main phase, who upon being sacrificed, returns the Mulldrifter and the Peregrine Drake to the field. This has him untap 5 lands, and draw 2 cards. He plays an island he drew, and realizes the Ascension should have another counter. He then puts the boots onto the Pramikon, and he then uses the Witch to exile the Drifter and Drake until end of turn, passing through his phases, and then returning them, untapping some lands, and drawing 2. Milan draws and passes. Mateus gets another counter on his Ascension, and does his Mulldrifter/Drake shenanigans, and Miguel decides to return his Meteor Golem to his hand. Miguel draws and casts his Meteor Golem, and responding to the Chulane draw trigger, Mateus flashes in Archangel Avacyn. He also taps the Diplomats to make Miguel have to attack Milan this turn. Miguel then draws, and the Meteor Golem blows up the Ascension, but not before Mateus makes some angels. Miguel plays out a Beast Whisperer, drawing from it, and plays an island. He then casts the Shrieking Drake a bunch, drawing 2 cards on cast, and playing out a land when he can. He does this several times. He then plays a Birds of Paradise, drawing the 2. Reclamation Sage then draws him 2 cards, and blows up the Swiftfoot Boots. Miguel then puts to stack a Dramatic Reversal, which is countered by Milan with Negate. Miguel then bounces back to his hand the Gilded Goose, and recasts it, drawing 2. He then bounces the Ornithopter, and recasts it, drawing 2. The Shrieking Drake then comes back a bunch more times, drawing 2 and letting him play some lands again. He then decides to change it up with the Dreamstalker, drawing him 2 while bouncing the Ornithopter back to hand, which Miguel then recasts and draws 2 more. Miguel then casts a Fiend Hunter, drawing 2, and as it comes in, exiles Kefnet. Milan chooses to put Kefnet third from the top of his library instead. We then move to Miguel's combat step, which has him forced to attack in, and he swings 15 points of damage at Milan. Milan responds before damage by casting Frantic Search, drawing 2, discarding 2, and untapping 3 lands, and then taking the hit. Miguel announces he's passing, and Mateus bounces his Drake again to untap 1 extra land at the end of turn, while Miguel has to discard down to 7. Fred loses 5 life to recast the First Sliver, and cascades into an Izzet Signet. Moving to combat, Fred swings the Sliver Squad at Miguel, dealing 10 damage and gaining 10 life, plus drawing 5 cards. He then plays a Snow-Covered Forest, and casts Brood Sliver, and gets a Cascade trigger, revealing Ancestral Visions and casting it, drawing 3 more cards. Before letting Fred leave his second main phase, Mateus exiles the Mulldrifter and returns it at the end of turn, drawing 2. Mateus draws for turn and casts Spark Double, having it come in as Pramikon, and choosing the other direction, which makes things complicated. The table is pretty sure at this point no one can attack anyone, and he passes turn, and at the end of turn, Milan casts Blue Sun Zenith to draw some cards. Milan plays an island, and then plays out Omniscience. This lets him cast from hand for free Kefnet, Soul Ring, Sensei's Divining Top, Mind Stone, and then Time Warp. Mateus casts Arcane Denial and targets the Time Warp, which has Milan activate his top. He arranges his top 3, and then taps the top to draw a card and put the top on top. He then puts to stack a Chemister's Insight, which Mateus counters with a Swan Song, which kinda makes me wonder why he didn't hit the Omniscience with it, but we'll chalk that up to this being a long game. In response, Milan then casts Narset's Reversal, returning the Arcane Denial to Mateus' hand, and has his copy target the Swan Song. Mateus still has enough to recast the Arcane Denial, and still targets the Time Warp with it. Milan then cracks his Mind Stone to draw a card, and the relevant spells are then countered. He activates his top again, and taps the top to put it on top. He casts an Impulse and looks at his top cards, keeping 1. He then recasts the top, and tops again. He then taps the top to draw, and we see Temporal Mastery hitting the stack. It resolves, but not before Mateus uses Return to Dust to exile Omniscience. Milan then moves to his next extra turn. Milan draws his top and casts it, activating it as it resolves. He then overloads the Cyclonic Rift to try and stall the game longer and make my life into a living nightmare, and it resolves and he succeeds. With nothing else, he passes. Thankfully, Miguel is able to recast Chulane, and the Beast Whisperer drawing a card. He plays out a Soul Ring, and with so much mana, is easily able to cast a Laboratory Maniac, and then enough creatures to draw himself out and win with the Lab Maniac ability. Game review time. So, who would have guessed that a game with 4 blue decks would have taken this long, said no one ever. Joking aside, it was really nice to meet everyone, and I was glad that they were able to get a chance to play on camera. I would be curious to know what the ruling is with 2 Pramikons out, forcing you to attack to the left or the right. It feels very much like you could have gone everywhere except for directly across from you. I do admire Fred's tenacity for sticking it out through the game, and he was able to do some pretty decent damage and get some life back despite the fact that he was basically a punching bag with no lands for most of it. Milan's Kefnet deck did a great job of reducing spells, but unfortunately it seemed like he was fighting against 3 other decks who wanted to stop him from doing what he wanted to do. As a result of using all those answers, when Miguel went for his combo win at the end, he was pretty much unhindered. I know a lot of people were pretty hot on Chulane coming out, but he seems like a very, linear commander where all you want to do is play cheap creatures and get a bunch of land drops and then be able to draw cards. I think this might also stem from the fact that I don't particularly care for Bant as a color pairing, but I really wasn't into him. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/MTGMudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/MTGMudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.